We now move on to our third presentation by Professor Nishimoto, and this really focuses on marine scientific research. Professor Nishimoto, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair, for the very kind introduction. First of all, before I begin, I would like to echo the appreciation expressed by the previous speakers to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea, the Korean Society of International Law, and ICLS for the invitation to speak at this very important conference. And also, before I begin, I would like to state that although I have been involved in the BBNJ process as a member of the Japanese delegation, the views expressed in this presentation are strictly my personal views as an academic and do not represent that of the Japanese delegation to the BBNJ Intergovernmental Conference. And that being said, my presentation for the next 20 minutes will be about the promotion and regulation of marine scientific research for the conservation and sustainable use of BBNJ. And having heard the very inspiring presentation from Dr. Furlan at the beginning of this panel, it should not be necessary for me to emphasize the very close relationship that exists between science and the law in issues such as the protection of the marine environment and conservation of biodiversity. And it goes without saying that scientific knowledge is crucial for the governance of the oceans. And this is especially so for areas beyond national jurisdiction, which are the least understood in terms of their biodiversity. And it is now a commonly accepted understanding that the governance of areas beyond national jurisdiction requires ocean management based on scientific information. And when we take a look at the revised draft text of the BBNJ agreement, which is the latest document from the BBNJ process, we can identify how the importance of science is on its way to being reflected in the agreement. First of all, the revised draft text refers to the use of best available science as a possible general principle and or approach to the entire instrument in its Article 5. The agreement also contains various functions which must be based on science, such as procedures in relation to the establishment of marine protected areas. And it also contains an article on the establishment of a scientific and technical body. So based on this importance of scientific information for the BBNJ agreement, I would like to consider in this presentation the question of how the BBNJ agreement can contribute to the promotion of marine scientific research, which is an important activity for acquiring relevant scientific information. And I would also like to consider how the BBNJ agreement could affect the legal regime regulating the conduct of marine scientific research in areas beyond national jurisdiction. And on these questions, I should start by the observation that all of the issues discussed as part of the BBNJ package have implications for marine scientific research, as indicated on this slide. I will not be able to discuss all of the ways in which the agreement may be related to marine scientific research, but on the question of regulation of marine scientific research in areas beyond national jurisdiction, how the regime of access to marine genetic resources is designed would seem to have the most significant impact on the regime for the regulation of marine scientific research. Thus, in what follows, I would like to identify some provisions in the revised draft treaty text of the agreement, mainly concerning access to MGRs, which may have an impact on marine scientific research in terms of its regulation and promotion. And then I will discuss whether the proposals reflected in the provisions are consistent with UNCLOS, and also what they add to the current regime for marine scientific research. And through this, I will try to assess the impact of the BBNJ agreement on marine scientific research activities. The starting point for discussions on the regulation of marine scientific research is probably the concept of access to marine genetic resources in the agreement, which is proposed to be defined in Article 1 of the agreement as the collection of marine genetic resources, although there are still different views as to the exact formulation. Thus, marine scientific research activities that involve the collection of living species or organisms could fall under the concept of access to marine genetic resources, even when they are conducted for scientific purposes. And in this regard, it is worth noting that the term bioprospecting, which usually refers to the collection of genetic material for commercial purposes, is not used in the revised draft treaty text. This concept was especially used in academic literature in the early phases of the discussions on marine genetic areas in areas beyond national jurisdiction, and is still used in some fora such as the Antarctic Treaty System, but the draft treaty text simply refers to the collection of marine genetic resources without any distinction as to the initial intention of doing so. And as shown on the slide, there is still a bracketed provision in the revised draft treaty text, which includes a proposal to exclude the application of the agreement or the part on marine genetic resources for marine scientific research, as highlighted in yellow on the slide. However, since most of marine genetic resources will likely be collected through marine scientific research activities, the exclusion of marine scientific research will most likely be unacceptable for delegations expecting the sharing of benefits arising out of the utilization of marine genetic resources. Next, I would like to address a provision in the draft treaty text concerning the regulation of collection or access to marine genetic resources. Article 10, which is heavily bracketed, reflects various proposals for rules concerning access to marine genetic resources, including prior and/or post-notification requirements or a regime of permits and licenses to collect or access marine genetic resources. While there is not yet an agreement on this issue, based on some of the proposals that are reflected in the text that you see on the slide, marine scientific research that involves the collection of samples could be made subject to a prior or post-cruise notification regime or a permit or a licensing regime. The negotiations on this point will significantly affect how marine scientific research activities will be conducted in areas beyond national jurisdiction. On the other hand, the draft treaty text contains some language that can be seen as an opportunity for the promotion of marine scientific research that is required for the effective governance of areas beyond national jurisdiction. The text on this slide are some of the provisions from Article 11 of the revised draft treaty text on the sharing of benefits. The sharing of benefits is one of the most controversial aspects of the agreement, and therefore, again, the article is heavily bracketed. However, you will see, as highlighted in yellow on the slide, that some proposals have been made to include a sharing of information, such as pre-cruise or pre-research information, post-cruise or post-research notification, or using the clearinghouse mechanisms to make available samples, data, and related information as a form of non-monetary benefit sharing. There is also a proposal, again highlighted in yellow at the bottom of the slide, to include the promotion of scientific research and the facilitation of collection of or access to marine genetic resources as one of the objectives of benefit sharing. These provisions could contribute to strengthening international cooperation in conducting marine scientific research, although a lot will depend on how the envisaged schemes would be operationalized in practice. And the establishment of a clearinghouse mechanisms, which was just referred to, is one aspect of the agreement which seems to attract the general support of delegations. The revised draft treaty text envisages the utilization of this mechanism as a centralized platform to enable states parties to have access to and disseminate information with respect to, and among other things, activities related to marine genetic resources, and this would seem to cover marine scientific research activities. And now that we have identified some provisions relevant to the regulation and promotion of marine scientific research in the revised draft treaty text of the agreement, an important question is whether the proposals that are contained in the text is consistent with Part 13 of UNCLOS, which is the current legal framework for the conduct of marine scientific research. And this question is important because, as mentioned also earlier, the UN General Assembly resolution, which established the BBNJ Intergovernmental Conference, and also the resolution that decided to develop this agreement, states that this process and its result should not undermine existing legal instruments, frameworks, or bodies. And in this regard, of course, it is important to note that Articles 256 and 257 of UNCLOS provides that all states have the right to conduct marine scientific research in the area and on the high seas. The freedom to conduct marine scientific research is also listed as one of the high seas freedoms under Article 87 of UNCLOS. And of course, any regulations concerning marine scientific research would have to be consistent with the freedom to conduct marine scientific research in areas beyond national jurisdiction. However, it is equally important to note that the freedom to conduct marine scientific research in areas beyond national jurisdiction or in any maritime area is not an absolute freedom. And as already highlighted by Dr. Ferland in the first presentation, Article 240 of UNCLOS, which is shown again on the slide, sets out general principles for conducting marine scientific research that applies in all maritime areas, including in areas beyond national jurisdiction. And as highlighted, the principles include conducting marine scientific research with appropriate scientific methods and means compatible with the convention. And there is also a requirement that marine scientific research must be conducted in compliance with all relevant regulations adopted in conformity with the convention, including those for the protection and preservation of the marine environment. And there is also a further obligation concerning the publication and dissemination of information and knowledge in Article 244, paragraph 1. And as highlighted on this slide, this article requires states and competent international organizations to make available by publication and dissemination through appropriate channels information on proposed major programs and their objectives, as well as knowledge resulting from marine scientific research. A notification regime could be regarded as implementing the general obligation under this article, and also perhaps the general obligation to promote marine scientific research, which is also contained in Article 242, if the function of the notification regime was for the promotion of marine scientific research and for the promotion of science more generally. And from this perspective, the question would be whether notification regimes would be useful in this regard, and also how to design a notification regime that would contribute to the promotion of marine scientific research activities and the further utilization of the scientific knowledge that is acquired. Of course, it is quite a different story if the purpose of the cruise notification was to simply ensure compliance with the benefit sharing regime and or maybe especially to ensure a traceability of marine genetic resources for the purpose of monetary benefit sharing. And in relation to permits and licensing schemes, I believe there's nothing in Part 13 that could justify such a restriction, and that requiring permits and licenses would seem to contradict the freedom to conduct marine scientific research and may in any event be inadvisable from the perspective of promoting marine scientific research. And also in this context, it should be mentioned that the second paragraph of Article 244 provides an obligation on states to actively promote the flow of scientific data and information and the transfer of knowledge resulting from marine scientific research, especially to developing states. And while these provisions are contained, they have been always there in UNCLOS, these provisions can be said to have suffered from under implementation in practice. And the BBNJ agreement is an opportunity to enhance the flow of scientific data and information that is acquired through marine scientific research. And the clearinghouse mechanism under the BBNJ agreement could have a role to play in this regard. And so it seems clear that the various rules and institutions already reflected and proposed in the draft treaty text can contribute to the promotion of marine scientific research and the exchange of information and knowledge acquired through such activities. However, some proposals do not reflect much detail, and states may still have different expectations of what they can produce. And in this regard, the negotiations might benefit from more focus on the needs of the scientific community in conducting marine scientific research and exchanging information and knowledge, and the needs of the agreement in having policy-relevant scientific information generated, exchanged, and compiled, and also the existing activities and frameworks, especially those coordinated by the UNESCO ILC. And in this regard, at the initiative of the president of the BBNJ Intergovernmental Conference, who we are lucky to have with us today in this panel, some efforts to focus on these issues have been made recently through the intersessional work on the clearinghouse mechanism. So in conclusion, the BBNJ agreement will likely have an impact on how marine scientific research in areas beyond national jurisdiction is regulated. And on the issue of regulation of marine scientific research, certain additional obligations as a result of the access regime could be regarded as an implementation of rules contained in UNCLOS in the context of international cooperation, although a permit or licensing regime would seem problematic in terms of consistency with UNCLOS and the promotion of marine scientific research. And on the issue of the promotion of marine scientific research and the utilization of scientific knowledge acquired as a result of such activities, the BBNJ agreement presents a very unique opportunity to effectively implement the provisions of UNCLOS and to strengthen the legal framework for cooperation in this field. And in this regard, how additional rules and institutions could further support the marine scientific research and more generally scientific efforts would need to be discussed in further detail. And with that, I would like to conclude my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Kentaro, for the reminder of how much work remains before us in building this agreement.